All right, welcome to part one. What are we going to be doing in part one? Well, we're going to be focusing really on the setup here. So we're not going to be writing much, if any, code at all in this one. We're going to be setting everything up so that we can start coding this app out. So we're going to need some accounts in order to get started on this. As we talked about in the introduction, we're going to be using Firebase, Vercel, and Chatengine. So we're going to need to create accounts there. But don't worry, these are all completely free without any payment information needed whatsoever. So we're gonna also need to clone the repository with all the boilerplate that I was talking about. Again, it's just a create React app with a little bit of boilerplate that I'll talk about. It's got the CSS and some prettier and some dependencies already written in it. So all you have to do is Npm Install. You don't have to actually go in and install all this stuff manually. So with Firebase, we're gonna set up Auth and Firestore in the dashboard. We're gonna create a Auth user manually, and we're going to insert our first Firestore document manually as well, all within the dashboard. And we're going to initialize the Firebase code within our project so that we can use Firebase throughout our app. Now, Chatengine is a cool little app, a cool little service that is going to allow us to do a lot of chat stuff. It's going to make it super easy for us to do a bunch of chat stuff. And again, you'll understand what I mean by that as we begin to integrate it into our application, but we're going to have to sign up and we're going to have to create our first user and chat manually within the dashboard because we don't have any code yet that's going to be able to do this for us. So we have to do it manually in the dashboard first. And then again, Vercel. So we're just going to sign up and that's all for now, just so we can have an account so we can associate our project with it later. We can go ahead and knock that out. So let's go ahead and get started on all this. All right, so the first thing you're gonna need to go ahead and do is go to firebase.google.com. Go ahead and sign up. If you already have a Google account, it's super easy. And once you've signed up, go ahead and go over here to the top right corner and click Go to Console. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit so that you can see everything nice and clear. So click Go to Console. It's gonna bring you to your Firebase console, and this is where you're gonna create your first project. So go ahead and click Create a Project, and I'm gonna name mine Chat Tutorial. And I have to accept the Firebase terms. Click continue. I'm gonna disable the analytics for this project because it's just a tutorial and I don't need all that. Create project. Now let this go ahead and build your project out. It should only take 30 seconds, something like that. So go ahead and wait for that. And now that that is done, go ahead and click continue. And now you're officially within your project's dashboard. Now let's take a look at what we have over here. So I'm gonna click project overview, and as you can see, that's where we're already at. So that didn't help much, but you can see this little authentication tab right here. Go ahead and click into that. And now that I've clicked into that, you can see the different pieces over here on the left that we'll be integrating with. Again, I'll zoom in. And as I said in the first video, we're gonna be using authentication. We're gonna use Cloud Firestore for our database, and we're gonna use storage to upload our images, specifically our avatars. Chatengine.io is going to handle sending images to the other users in the chats, but in order for us to have avatars, we're going to want to upload those ourselves and handle that ourselves. So let's start with authentication. Make sure you have authentication selected over here and click Get Started. The first thing we need to do is enable email and password authentication. So click Enable here. You can leave this disabled and click Save. And now we've officially allowed our users to be able to sign up for an account via email and password. There's other options like Google and Facebook and Twitter login, GitHub, all that good stuff. But for this tutorial, we're just gonna do email and password. So we need to go ahead and create our first user manually. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna use my email and I'm gonna create a password. You're gonna wanna use your email and create a password of your own. So I'm going to enter in my email and enter in a password and click Add User. And now we have a new user that can log in via Firebase for this application. And as you can see right here, there's this user ID. We're actually going to use this in order to basically link our user's object, our login auth object, to a Firestore document. So a little bit more on that later, but let's go ahead and create our first Firestore document now. So on the left, click Cloud Firestore. And then right here, click Create Database. Now let's go ahead and come down here to Start in Test Mode and click Next. Now this is saying once you set your Firestore location, you cannot change it later. So I would just choose wherever it's closest to you. For me, US Central is the closest location, and that will make sure that we have the fastest connection speed, basically the shortest distance for the signals to travel. So I'm gonna click Enable. And once that's complete, you'll be presented with this kind of interesting little UI here. It's gonna allow us to create entries for our database. So let's start by creating our first chat user. So click Start Collection. And just keep in mind, we're gonna be doing all of this programmatically later, but we don't have any code yet. So we wanna go ahead and just get everything initialized in the dashboard. So this collection ID is gonna be chat users with a capital U. Click Next. Now for the document ID, we actually want to paste in our user's ID that we had in the authentication window, if you remember. I copied our user ID, and now I'm pasting it in as the document ID. So it's effectively linked now. I can figure out which document belongs to a given auth user. Now there's two fields that we want to store for any given user. We want to store a avatar URL, so the URL to their avatar image, which in the beginning is literally just going to be an empty string because it doesn't exist yet. They haven't uploaded an avatar yet. So just leave the value empty and make sure that the type is string and the field name is avatar. The second thing that we want to store for any given user is a username. So type in username, and I'm actually going to give it a capital N just to distinguish it from Chatengine's username. You'll see when we get into code. But for now, we're just going to do this. And again, we want to have an empty string for now. We're going to come back after we create the user in Chatengine and fill this in. And when we have our code, we're going to fill this in programmatically. But again, for now, we don't have that code. So just go ahead and leave both of these blank, but go ahead and create the fields and click Save. And now you can see we have this document here under Chat Users Collection with an empty string for both avatar and username. So let's go ahead and hop over to Chatengine to create our user there, and then we can come back and add the username here. All right, cool. Step 2, let's go to chatengine.io. And once you're here, you're gonna wanna go ahead and sign up for an account. I've already got an account, so I'm just simply gonna log in really quick. And once you're signed up and you've logged in, you're gonna wanna create a new project. I've already got one, it's called Chat Tutorial. But for this, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm gonna create a new one. I'm gonna call it Chat Tutorial 2, I guess. And I'm gonna click Get Started on that. And once I've created that, you can see I've been brought to this dashboard where I can create users, I can create chats, and I can delete the entire project if I want to. Here we have a project ID and a private key. This private key, you do not wanna let anybody see this. I'm letting you see it because this is for a tutorial and I'm gonna delete this later. But this is a secret. You don't want anybody to see this. So we'll get more into that a little bit later. This is one of the reasons why we're gonna have a serverless function so that this private key does not end up inside of the client whatsoever. So the first thing we wanna do is create our first user, okay? So let's go ahead and create a new user. Now, you'll have 3 inputs, username, secret, and confirm secret. For the username, go ahead and write in whatever username you want. I'm gonna put in port.exe. Now, the secret is gonna be our ID because again, we want to make sure that we have an ability to link all of these things. So there has to be some sort of common key between all of these elements so that we can have some sort of way to access and individualize each piece of data. And for that, we're gonna use, again, that authentication ID. So copy that from Firebase, come over here and paste that in as the secret, and go ahead and paste that in under confirm secret as well and click create person. And now we have created our first user within Chatengine. So we can go back over to our chat tutorial Firebase project, go in here to our user under the documents here, go into our username and put in the username you just created for the user in Chatengine, which is port.exe. Click update, and now we should be good here and we don't need this Firebase window anymore right now. Actually, we will go ahead and keep that open. We'll come back to this in a minute. So I'm gonna wanna create a new chat and I'll click the new chat button here and I'm just gonna name this test. The admin is the person who creates the chat. And again, we're gonna put this all in code later, but for now we just need to do this in the dashboard so we can have stuff to work with. I'm gonna put port.exe, it's our only user anyway. So I'll create the chat where the admin is port.exe. And now we have a chat, a user within Chatengine. We've associated it with our Firebase setup and we are good to go with Chatengine for now. Cool, so now that we've got all of that we are going to want to come over to this gear icon in the Firebase dashboard and go to project settings. If you scroll down, we need to create a new app for our project. And this is a web app, so click the little thing that looks like HTML brackets. Now I'm gonna name this chat web app. And I'm gonna not check this because we're actually gonna host this on Vercel, so register app. And now here we are left with this this code that we're gonna use inside of our project to initialize our Firebase so that we can use Firebase within our application programmatically. We're not gonna copy this right now, but keep this handy. What I like to do is go over to the tab, right click and click pin just so I can have it ready when I need it, because we're gonna need it shortly, but we actually are gonna have to go to the GitHub and clone the repository first to get the code ready. So let's do that. Cool, so in the description, you're gonna find a link to the GitHub. Go ahead and click that and you'll see that you are at the React Chatengine demo repository. This says private, but it'll be public by the time you are seeing this video. So what we want to do is make sure that we're on this repository, go over here to where it says code, and then you'll see here, there's this URL. Go ahead and copy that. Now, in whichever terminal you're using, if you're using Mac, obviously you're using terminal. If you're using Windows, you're in the command line of whatever operating system you're using. Make sure that you go to the directory that you want your project to be located at. In my case, I'm here in Workstation Code Tutorials. And you're gonna want to run the following code in order to clone the repository. It's very simple. If you don't already have Git installed, make sure you have Git installed. That is a definite prerequisite to this. Go ahead and make sure that Git is installed. Obviously, you're gonna need Node.js and all of that as well. I'll put links in the description in case you don't have that stuff installed, but hopefully you do by this point. So let's go ahead and say Git Clone, and then paste in that URL that we just copied. Click enter, and it's going to clone all of the code to our machine. And now I can actually cd into that. It's React-Chatengine-demo. Go ahead and change directories into there, and I'm gonna ls and look inside of here, and you can see that all the code is in fact there. Now I want to go ahead and type in code dot, which you might not be using VS Code and you might not have this shortcut, so you may just want to open it in your VS Code or your code editor, but I'm going to type this in. It's going to open VS Code for me. So go ahead and open up the project in your code editor of choice. Now, before we go through this and talk about all these files, we need to change branches because this is the finished code and we don't want to look at the finished code. We actually want to be on our branch 01 init, and that is going to be the code that we're going to start off from. So we need to go to that branch specifically. So let's go ahead and go back to our terminal here and say git checkout 01_init. And now we are on the proper branch. So if I go back to my code editor, we can see that all of those files that were there are gone and we're just left with the plain project here. So let's talk about this. It is a normal create React app, basic just layout, but we've added a few things. Let's start in the package.json. And notice that I've added some dependencies. I've added Axios, I've added Firebase, Formic, and we've added a yup, which is what we're gonna use for our validations. We've got some semantic UI stuff and React Chatengine, React Avatar Editor. This is gonna be the dependencies that we're using in order to do some of the stuff that we're gonna be doing throughout the project. So the first thing that you're gonna wanna do is while you're inside of the directory React Chatengine demo, you wanna go ahead and run Npm Install. And again, if you don't have Npm, if you don't have Node.js or any of this stuff installed, you need to go ahead and go install all of that stuff first before we move forward. But I'm gonna assume you've already done that. So go ahead and let this install. It'll take a minute or two. Awesome, it has finished. So I'm gonna just clear out my console and get rid of that terminal window for now. Now that we've got all of our NPM modules installed, we can see that there's a node modules folder with all of those in there. Great. Now, what I wanna do is I just want to quickly make sure that everything is running properly. So I'm going to run npm start and let this boot up really quick. So go ahead and do that. Make sure that yours pops open a window here. And we should see in just a minute a working create React app. In fact, it's working fine on my end. It just says hello from port exe. And that's what I would expect here, because inside of my components app.js folder, I'm just rendering hello from port exe. So this is working as expected so far. So far, so good. If yours is not, then go back and make sure you've followed all the steps properly. And I'm gonna go ahead and continue from here. So what I wanna do to start off with is just run through the files and make sure that you have a good understanding of everything that is in this application. All right, to start off with, let's go inside the public folder. We have a index.html file, which is where our entire application is going to end up being injected into. Right here, this root div. Our entire app is gonna end up being compiled and then injected into this root div here. And of course, you can see that by right-clicking inside of here and seeing that we have this div with an ID of root, and our application was actually injected inside of this root. And of course, in a full-scale application, there's gonna be a lot more than just a string in there. You're gonna have the entire app. But yeah, so that's where the app is going to end up. And you can see inside of the index.js file that the React DOM.render is actually taking all of your JSX, compiling it down. You can see our app component. And then the second argument here is document.getElementById root. That's that element I just showed you a second ago. It's basically saying, hey, take all of that stuff and throw it inside of this div. Cool. So that is kind of how that's working. Now let's take a look at some other stuff. We have a prettier RC file. Now this is what I'm going to be using to force certain JavaScript formatting rules that makes the code look pretty. And if you go into your file, if you're using VS Code, if you're not, you can ignore this part. Go to Preferences, Settings, and I'm going to go into my my workspace here, my workspace settings, and type in Format. And you can see that there's a default formatter option. I'm gonna open this up and click on esbenp.prettier VS Code. If you don't have that, that's fine. This is just how I'm gonna be doing it, but I do recommend you use the same options as me. And then underneath there, you can also see format on save. I'm gonna click that as well, so that every time I save the file, it's gonna automatically prettify my file so that it always stays nice and pretty. Then I'm gonna erase format here and type in prettier. And you can see that there is a config path that I need to configure in order to make sure that it knows where my prettier RC file is, so it can get the config that I have written inside of this file, which is just ./, so the directory that we're in, and then the name of the file, which is prettier RC. And then just make sure that that's saved and click X on that, and I'm all set up for my prettier file to be loaded in with VS Code. We have a jsconfig.json file, and this just contains one option, which is our base URL. And this is gonna allow us to do imports without having to do the like .. relative path names. We can actually import files in a much cleaner way, and I'll show you as we get into that later, but just understand that's all this is doing right now. It's just a configuration file that is loaded in that says, hey, our base URL is our source folder. And that is pretty much it for the boilerplate code that I've added, other than, of course, like I was saying, the CSS. I've written a ton of CSS for the project. That's all in here. And finally, if we go inside of the components folder, I've created a app folder with an index.js file that exports the app so that we can import it like this instead of having to do components/app. Okay, that is pretty much the overview of the React application as it stands right now. Okay, so now that we've got, Firebase and all that set up as well, I want to quickly add our Firebase initialization code into our project, and I want to show that it's working. Now, what I want to do is I want to create an environment variable file where we're going to put some environment variables that's going to hold our Firebase project config. Now, later on, we're going to get rid of this environment variable file, and we're going to put our environment variables inside of Vercel. But for now, I want to go ahead and just do this. So we're going to create a new file inside of our project with a .env. That's going to be the name of the file, .env. I want you to create that file, and we're gonna go back to our dashboard, And each of these is going to be an environment variable of its own. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna copy the first line here, and I better just keep these both on the same screen, or on the screen at the same time, because we're gonna be copying back and forth a lot. We're gonna paste the first one in here. Now, the naming convention for React app environment variables, the way that they're loaded in when we're using create React app, is we want to make sure that we append the name of the variable with React app, React_app, and then the name of the variable, which is gonna be API_key. So we're gonna name it React app API key. Now I need to get rid of the quotes here because we don't need quotes for environment variables here. And instead of a colon, we're gonna put an equal sign. So really what it is we're saying React app API key equals, and then the value. And we need to do that for each and every single one of these. So it's gonna take you a minute. Go ahead and pause it and knock this out. It should only take you a few minutes. Go ahead and do that. And I'm gonna do that while you do it, but I'm gonna fast forward it. Okay, so now that I've completed that, make sure you have a total of 6 of these. So you'll make sure that you have 6 lines of code, and make sure that you don't have any typos. It's super important. I have one right here. So instead of fomain, it needs to be domain. Just make sure you don't have any typos in here. Just give it a second look, make sure you're good to go. And when you are, just save that and you can close it and not worry about it again for a while. So in order to initialize our Firebase code inside of our React application, we are actually going to want to create a service that's gonna be able to it's gonna export some Firebase functionality for us that can be shared across the entire app without us initializing it multiple times. So I'll show you what I mean by that. In your source folder, create a new folder called service. Oops. And inside of here is where we're gonna put a file called firebase.js and a index.js file. And the index.js file is just simply going to export everything from firebase.js. So just make sure in here you put export asterisk from ./Firebase, just like this. And then we can go inside of our Firebase folder and actually put in the code, which is going to be this code right here. I'm going to full screen this now, and I'm going to go through this and explain exactly what's going on, but I need you to type all this in. But basically, we need to import Firebase from Firebase/app, and this has to be the very first line in this file. It has to be. You have to import that before you import these 3 things right here. But once you've imported all this, we're going to add in a try catch block. And we need to, inside of the try block, we're going to say Firebase.initialize app, and we're going to take the items that we have, the same ones here that we have right here, and we're going to add them here. Now notice there's 7 here, but only 6 on the other side. And specifically, we're missing the database URL. Okay, so it looks like we might actually not need this database URL. So for now, I'm just gonna get rid of it in my .env file. And actually I don't have it there obviously, but I'm gonna get rid of it here. So line 10 here, I'm just gonna delete this entirely. We don't need that. So that can just go away. But we do need the API key, auth domain, project ID, and these 3. Make sure that you set it equal to process.env dot, and then the name of the env var that's associated with it in here, okay? So once you've got all of that, you can add your catch, and then what we're doing here is we're exporting an object called FB, which is just short for Firebase. There's 3 pieces of this. There's auth, storage, and Firestore. And all we're doing is we're creating an instance of auth, an instance of storage, and an instance of Firestore, and exporting them all as one object so they can be shared across the app. Don't worry too much about the technical aspects of this, but just understand that this is a way to share the same instances throughout the entire application without having to initialize it each time we want to use it in different components. So let's take a look at how we would access our database. If you remember, inside of our Firestore, we actually added, it's glitching on me, hold on. We actually added a single entry already, a single chat user. Let's see if we can log this guy. Let's see if we can actually log it. So what I want to do is go to my app component, And I'm gonna write some code in here that will log it. And this will basically just prove to me that I've initialized my Firebase code correctly. And that way I can feel a little bit better moving forward, that at least we've gotten that and done that correctly. So in order to do that, I'm gonna get rid of this right here and add in some curly braces so that we can actually add in some function code. And I'll continue to return hello from port.exe. Oh man. So I'll continue to return this, and I can just save it and make sure that it's still running properly. Go to localhost 3000, still running good. So no errors yet that I can see. Now above this, we are going to want to write a effect, which is a hook in React. Again, hopefully you have a little basic understanding of React hooks by now, but we need to import the useEffect hook. So we need to import useEffect from React. And now we can use useEffect. useEffect. And all we're going to want to do in this effect for now is when the component initializes, we want to do a call to Firebase and grab the user where the username is equal to port.exe and just log it to make sure that Firebase is working properly. So we can do FB. Make sure you import Firebase FB from service. That's that object we just created from our service. So import that. And we're going to want to use the the Firestore key on that particular object. So if we go back to it, I can show you specifically fb.firestore is this line right here. So we're just accessing that instance of Firestore. And we want to use the collection method. The collection was chat users. And if we go, I can show you, that was the collection name right here. Now, in order to get this particular document, we're going to use a query. So let's do that. We want to say .where username, and then the second argument is 2 equal signs. And then the third argument is the username that we want to find, which is port.exe. And we're going to call get on that, which returns a promise. So we can call then, and the result of that promise is it's like a snapshot. So we can say const users, all the users that it finds, is going to be equal to res.docs, because there might be multiple. Forgot my little equal sign here. There might be multiple since we're doing a query. There could be multiple. In our case, there's definitely not. So since we know there's not, we can just access the first item in that array and say !.data. And let me just say that !.dot is optional chaining in JavaScript. It's a relatively new feature that just says if this doesn't exist, if this array doesn't have any items in it, for example, it's not going to break when it tries to access the 0th element or the data function of that item. Okay. So this is just optional chaining. I've got a video on that if you want to look at that and understand that a little bit better. But all we're saying here is users. Actually, I don't even need to call this users. I should just call it user because it's the first user in this array. We're grabbing the user that we find with the port.exe username. And then all we want to do is simply log that. So I'm going to save that. My prettier formatter just automatically formatted that for me. And let's take a look at what is being logged here in the console when I refresh. So here we actually have an error, and that's because we created this env this env file with all the envars in it. But in order to load that into the app, I need to restart my server. So I'm closing out my server and I'm running npm start now just to reboot everything up and make sure that the envars are loaded in. And while that boots up, I'm getting my console ready. And as you can see, it successfully logs the Firebase object with the username port.exe and an avatar as an empty string. We know that that data is correct, so we can assume that Firebase has indeed been initialized correctly. All right, and finally, what we want to just make sure you go ahead and do is create an account here at Vercel. So just go to vercel.com and /login and go ahead and create an account here. I've already got an account, so I'm just going to continue with GitHub. Once you've created that and you've logged in, you can see that there is a dashboard Don't worry about any of this yet. We're not going to create our project within Vercel yet. That's going to be a little bit later on, but just make sure you have your account created so we can just get right into it later on. Once you've got that ready to go, we're done here. Awesome. Okay, so that was kind of probably the most boring of the entire series because we haven't written any code yet. All we've done was get all the dependencies installed, get some accounts set up, do some dashboard stuff, but that's going to make it way easier for us to just dive right into the code moving forward. So if you haven't already, please give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all in the next video.